Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Some years ago, in reading the translation of Imam Zaid Shakir, The Heirs of the Prophets, which is a commentary of Ibn Rajab on the hadith of Abu Darda, which speaks to the issue of seeking knowledge. In the introduction, Imam Zaid Shakir raised an important point that indicates to an important concept. He talked about Sheikh Jamaluddin al-Qasimi, rahmatullahi alayh, and he said that Jamaluddin al-Qasimi emerged as the intellectual leader of the nascent Salafi movement in Syria. However, Sheikh al-Qasimi situated his prolific and oftentimes critical writings within the dominant paradigm. His writings showed respect for both that paradigm and the scholars whose contributions were instrumental in shaping it. Unfortunately, in recent years, that paradigm has come under attack from within. This attack has been initiated by radical reformers whose strident rhetoric oftentimes signals their own ignorance of the very institutions they target, leveling vicious, largely uncritical polemics against the four juridical schools, tasawwuf, and the validity of rational proofs and philosophical formulations in creedal matters. These reformers are wittingly or unwittingly threatening the historical unity of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. In many instances, these reformers situate their attacks within the historical context of the Hanbali school, relying on Ibn Taymiyyah as their principal referent. This tendency has led in recent years to what could be referred to as neo-traditionalist backlash. Some defenders of the dominant Sunni paradigm respond to the vicious attacks of the reformers with equal or surpassing venom. In their zeal, some go so far as to attempt to exclude the Hanbali school from the ranks of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Others, while condemning those reformers who declare the likes of Sheikh Muhyiddin ibn Arabi a non-believer, themselves declare Ibn Taymiyyah to be outside of the pale of Islam. If this polarization continues, our heartland, physically and figuratively, will be torn and divided to such an extent that we will never again be able to attain to the critical mass necessary to reestablish Islam as a dominant social political reality. And he continues to talk about the polarization of Islamic discourse, although not with much continuity and depth, because he's dealing with an introduction to a text. He's not addressing the issue head on and with consistency and profundity, but his insights in themselves are very profound. And it would be hoped that that framework that he began to develop for an analysis would be expounded upon because of the insights there in that analysis, even though it is quite concise. Because of the insights in that analysis, we find an important point being raised. One may agree or disagree regarding the identity of the dominant paradigm. The reality on the ground is that Muslims are in a crisis, an intellectual crisis meaning a transition point. Whether we oblige contemporary Salafi discourse to respect the mystical trends in Islamic thought and the intellectualism to be found in Kalam or not, what we find is a crisis of orientation and contextualization. The reality on the ground is that differences of opinion in some places have led to bloodshed. And in other places, to bad relationships, disrupted relationships. The scholarship that's necessary in order to be able to carry out exactly what Imam Zaid Shakir is pointing to many times is missing because of the orientation of our educational institutions. A person like Al-Qasimi was a mujtahid. He inclined toward ijtihad. And Al-Qasimi represents a trend just like Ahmed Shakir in Egypt, which was very rooted in knowledge, as well as Shawkani and Amir Sanani. There was a Salafi trend in the last century, toward the end of the last century, pretty much. That, well, I should say in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a trend which was very grounded in knowledge. Sadiq Hassan al Khan. And when that trend began to decline, it became stubbornly literalistic. Not the literalism of an Imam ibn Hazm, although we know that Imam ibn Hazm is said to have been sharp tongued, but his scholarship was indeed profound. So one can disagree on some things, but he is considered an Imam. So literalism in itself is not the problem. The problem is a dominating ignorance and a lack of virtue many times. Dominating ignorance, meaning the lack of profundity of scholarship and refinement in scholarship and lack of manners. Historically, we can't assume that the most legit paradigm is what is culturally considered tradition. Even in the Maliki school itself, we find people like Abi Zaid al-Qarawani, who made the claim that Allah was above his throne by his essence. Subhanallah. And this is considered anathema to a good many people, but what we find is that Imam Abi Zaid, as an Imam in the Maliki madhab, we find that his aqidah, a strong Salafi oriented text, we find that it was taught and explained by non Salafi oriented scholars. So who preceded who? Does it matter at this point? Scholarship has its own language. Knowledge stands on its own. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he was able to write within the context of Islamic scholarship as well as was Ibn Arabi. And they both came to different conclusions, and we see the controversy that surrounds both. The issue that we have in the Muslim community is the failure of an appreciation for scholarship and the lack of appreciation for good discourse and debate. So that debate turns into personal attack, and personal attack means insult and character assassination, and at times violence. Ignorance in and of itself. We've always had a diverse number of trends in Islamic thought, some legitimate and some not, but all very scholarly. All very scholarly. Whether we talk about the Ibadiyya or the Shia or the Mu'tazila, what we find in common, even with the people that are termed the people of Bid'ah, is scholarship. Something missing today. So proofs and positions are argued and weighed against the Quran and the Sunnah. So scholarship then is what is the missing point, the lack of respect. The lack of respect for the position of others. So if we're able to couch any of these different trends within an Islamic paradigm, what we're forced to do is to come to look at the evidences and to appreciate the taking up of positions and to weigh them according to the Quran and the Sunnah. إن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله ورسوله.